December 16, 1994, the Ardennes Forest. Thomas Randall, a private first class, crouched in the freezing cold, his breath forming ghostly clouds in the frosty atmosphere. A more immediate threat, night patrols moving through the forest, was masked by the silence created by the distant thunder of German artillery. The 101st Airborne Division, Randall's unit, had been ordered to hold their positions and conserve ammunition. After dark, only a few missions were required according to standard regulations. Command had reported zero visibility. Stay in your positions until dawn. However, Randall had knowledge that was not available to his superiors. For 3 weeks, he had been using a device that violated all the rules of the field manual to secretly modify his rifle scope. Randall had constructed something his comrades mockingly referred to as his owl eyes, a primitive but functional night vision device that allowed him to see thermal signatures through his rifle scope. To do this, he had used discarded aircraft parts, a flashlight battery, and phosphorescent paint from decommissioned German equipment. Battalion headquarters had made it clear that unauthorized modifications to standard weapons were prohibited. If discovered, he faced court-martial. Randall made a decision that would change the outcome of the battle, and possibly the entire campaign, when he noticed movement 300 meters ahead. German reconnaissance units searching for gaps in the American line. Randall said to Corporal James Winters, his observer, "I see them. They're moving toward Baker Company, 20 men or more." Winters shook his head. "There's absolutely nothing to see in this darkness. Cease fire," was the order. Randall realized that if he didn't comply, he could lose his job, or he could prevent the deaths of hundreds of American soldiers resting in their foxholes. Before launching their major counteroffensive at daybreak, the Germans advanced on the American positions under cover of darkness. He aimed at the invisible enemy and adjusted his forbidden device with trembling fingers. Thomas Randall was born on April 12, 1923, in Clearwater, Minnesota, a small farming town where winter temperatures often drop to -30 degrees. Randall grew up in a family of 4 and spent his childhood hunting white-tailed deer with his father, usually before sunrise or after dark, when the animals were most active. He had an almost supernatural ability to detect movement in low light, and by the age of 12, he was able to track and kill a deer in near-total darkness. After serving in the trenches during World War I, his father, William Randall, returned home with psychological and physical injuries. He told his sons that war was a waste of time. Men die for meaningless terrain while following orders from officers who are blind to what is happening. However, Thomas enlisted in the military almost immediately after the attack on Pearl Harbor, because he believed that this war had a clearer moral purpose than his father's war. At Fort Benning, Georgia, Randall achieved the best shooting scores in his company during basic training. Sergeant Maxwell, his instructor, immediately recognized his talent. In his evaluation, Maxwell noted, "Most men shoot where the target is. Randall shoots where the target is likely to be." His remarkable patience, steady hand, and uncannily accurate predictions made him perfect for sniper training. Randall's unique background proved to be both a strength and a weakness in sniper school. Although his hunting experience helped him in the field, his independence made him an adversary of military orders. Because of his civilian hunting experience, he questioned the instructors about standard equipment and suggested changes. As a result, his colleagues gave him the unflattering nickname, Professor. According to his shooting instructor, the boy can shoot, but he doesn't realize that war is not hunting. You use conventional equipment, follow orders, and don't improvise unless you are specifically asked to do so in battle. Randall found it difficult to accept this way of thinking. Adaptability and improvisation were advantageous in hunting. You repaired anything that didn't work. You adapted when circumstances changed. When lives were at stake, strict adherence to rules seemed counterproductive. However, in September 1944, after graduating as one of the top 3 in his class, he was transferred to the 101st Airborne Division. He found it difficult to fit into the unit. Most of the men had fought side by side during Operation Market Garden and in Normandy. They were suspicious of replacement soldiers, especially those with special training who had not yet proven their combat effectiveness. This was exacerbated by Randall's tendency to tinker with his equipment. When he went to his squad leader with ideas for increasing their efficiency, the phrase, "Here comes the professor with one of his crazy ideas," became a catchphrase. Staff Sergeant Miller, his immediate superior, was particularly uncooperative. He replied, "The Army has invested millions in developing this equipment. Do you think you know more than the entire U.S. Army Procurement Agency?" Randall's frequent response, "I know what works under these conditions," did not go down well with his superiors. Randall distinguished himself by December 1944 with 13 confirmed enemy kills after participating in several engagements. His techniques remained unorthodox, but his accuracy was unmatched. He usually worked alone or with a single observer, often choosing locations that offered a better field of fire but appeared too exposed. Using local materials that were better suited to the environment, he experimented with camouflage tactics that were not covered in training. Although his comrades grudgingly respected him for his achievements, the officers were skeptical of him, viewing his innovations as potentially dangerous deviations from proven strategies. No one knew that Randall was working on his most drastic change yet, which would soon become his greatest breach of protocol and his most important contribution to the war. Adolf Hitler's last desperate attempt to divide the Allied forces in northwestern Europe and possibly force a negotiated peace was the Ardennes Offensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge. To launch a major surprise offensive through the wooded hilly Ardennes forest in Belgium and Luxembourg, which Allied commanders considered an unrealistic approach, the Germans had assembled 25 divisions, or over 250,000 soldiers. The American troops occupying this area were scattered. While experienced units were resting and repairing, the First Army had stationed inexperienced divisions there to gain combat experience in a sector considered peaceful. It was assumed that major offensive actions would be hampered by the terrain, especially in winter. Transporting large troop formations and tanks was challenging due to the dense trees, small roads, and steep ravines. The Germans began their attack on December 16, 1944, with heavy artillery fire, followed by infantry and tank assaults along the front. The Americans were taken completely by surprise. The Allies' air superiority was nullified when bad weather forced them to ground their aircraft. Poor visibility due to fog and snow allowed German units to advance unnoticed. In several sectors, entire American companies were overrun before they could mount a successful defense. After Operation Market Garden, Private First Class Randall and the 101st Airborne Division were in France undergoing retraining when they received urgent orders to move to Bastogne, an important Belgian transportation hub. By the time they arrived on December 19th, German troops had already surrounded the town. Brigadier General McAuliffe, the division commander, established a line of defense, but it was in jeopardy. The Germans had overwhelming numerical superiority. Parts of 5 German divisions, including the elite 5th Panzer Army, consisting of about 50,000 men with tanks, artillery, and air support, fought against the 17,000 airborne troops defending Bastogne. The Americans lacked winter equipment, medical supplies, and ammunition. With temperatures around -12 degrees Celsius, many soldiers suffered from frostbite and frostnip. Communication was disrupted. German units had infiltrated American lines, cut telephone lines, and ambushed messengers, and radios often malfunctioned in the cold. Units often operated without precise knowledge of enemy movements or positions in their vicinity. In this situation, night operations became extremely important. In an effort to capture Bastogne before Allied reinforcements could arrive, the Germans patrolled the area in large numbers at night to find gaps in the American defenses. The standard doctrine on both sides called for minimal operations after dark without the use of special night vision equipment, which would not become widespread for decades. Precise firing was virtually impossible, as soldiers had to rely on flares and starlight to see anything. American forces had strict orders to wait until morning before launching offensive operations, to report enemy activity, but not to attack unless directly attacked, and to conserve ammunition during the night. Given the technology available to them, these orders made tactical sense, but they also gave the Germans an advantage, as they could move around in the dark with relative impunity. These restrictions became increasingly frustrating for Randall. From his pre-war experience, he had learned that a hunter who knew how to use darkness to his advantage could benefit from it. He had experimented with various materials to improve night vision, and by mid-December, he believed he had found a workable solution. The question was whether he could use it, or whether he would have to disobey orders to demonstrate its effectiveness. Colonel Robert Sink, the regimental commander, had issued clear instructions. "We must not waste ammunition by firing aimlessly into the night. Every bullet must hit its target. Our job at night is to observe and report. Only attack if the enemy directly threatens your position and is within 50 meters. These instructions would soon be put to the test as the Germans prepared for a major nighttime invasion aimed at reaching the unprotected supply depot at Bastogne, which would likely result in the loss of the encircled Americans. As darkness fell on December 20th, the temperature had dropped to 7 degrees below zero. Randall and Winters, positioned on a wooded ridge overlooking a narrow valley, were aware that German soldiers would attempt to advance artillery pieces in the dark. They had been in place since 2 p.m., carefully concealing their position and creating many escape routes in case they were discovered. Their instructions were clear. Do not attack unless you are in immediate danger, but observe and report any enemy movement. They were 5 miles behind battalion headquarters, and radio contact was sporadic due to German jamming and bad weather. Randall noticed the first signs of movement at 7 p.m. Randall had used his special telescopic sight to carefully observe the valley at night, unlike other snipers who relied mainly on sound. Although his invention was still immature by modern standards, it was groundbreaking at the time. Randall had applied a luminous coating to special filters connected to his scope, using phosphorescent paint from German aircraft avionics. The radium compounds in the paint glowed even in very low light. He had discovered that when filtered appropriately, this radiation could detect the heat signatures of bodies moving against the colder background of trees and snow. A tiny battery-powered UV light source, taken from a signal lamp he had attached next to his scope, amplified the effect. The end result was an enhanced ability to detect thermal differences in near-total darkness, rather than true night vision, as known to today's soldiers. Due to the faint violet glow, visible only at close range, the modifications would have given away their position and violated at least 7 regulations governing the use of standard equipment. Randall muttered, "I see movement." About 300 meters away, at 11 o'clock, a group of men was slowly climbing up the ravine. Winters was skeptical, as he couldn't see anything with his normal binoculars. "Are you sure? I don't hear anything." "They're being careful," Randall said. "They walk 5 meters and then pause to be alert." Randall continued to track the almost unrecognizable figures using the traditional penetration method. "I have 23 employees. They are carrying a heavy load on their shoulders, most likely mortars or machine guns." Winters reached for the receiver. "I'll write a report. Baker Company needs to be aware that they have something to do." Winters tried to make contact, but the radio only crackled. After 3 attempts, a faint voice came through. "Lightning 6, this is Baker Actual. The report is illegible, say over again." Winters tried again, speaking clearly and distinctly. "This is Lightning 6, Baker Actual. An enemy patrol from the northeast ravine is approaching your position with approximately platoon strength. They should reach your border in 30 minutes. Over." It was a quick and annoying response. Lightning 6 continued to observe, "Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. There is no evidence of enemy movement in this area. According to flares, visibility is poor. Maintain your position and keep an eye on the situation. Out." Winters cursed and turned off the radio. "They don't believe we're real. They won't alert the company until they have visual confirmation from multiple sources." Randall continued to track the German patrol with his scope. They were obviously elite soldiers, accustomed to night operations and moving with practiced efficiency. At their current pace, it would take them less than 20 minutes to reach the sleeping American company. Although Baker Company had set up defensive positions, they were more concerned with the main road than with the ravine the Germans were now using to bypass their perimeter. Randall said, "They're going to be massacred. Before anyone realizes what's going on, the Germans will be inside their lines." Winters nodded grimly. "I understand, but orders are orders. We report. Unless there is a direct threat, we avoid conflict." Randall quickly did the math. 300 meters away from the German patrol was a very difficult shot in daylight and almost impossible in the dark. He believed that with his modifications, he could hit a man-sized target at that distance, but that would give away their position. That would be a clear violation of current instructions, which are more important. Randall said, "They have a radio operator with them. There also seems to be an officer in charge of the patrol. If I take them out, they might get so confused that Baker Company gains some time." Winters shook his head vigorously. "No way. Randall, that's a disadvantage. We have clear instructions. Unauthorized fire that breaks radio silence could jeopardize the entire sector. Our position would become the target of all German artillery observers within a radius of several kilometers." Randall was silent for a moment as he watched the German patrol's skillful maneuvers in the shadows. Having encountered no resistance, they were now 250 meters away and moving with greater confidence. Through his scope, he could see that some of the soldiers were carrying what looked like flamethrowers, weapons that would wreak terrible damage on the wooden bunkers where Baker Company had taken up position. Randall addressed the scout by his first name and said quietly, "James, there are 217 men in Baker Company. How many Germans would survive if they reached their position unnoticed?" Winters did not respond immediately. He was a veteran of the Battle of Normandy and had seen entire units destroyed because of errors in early warning. "That's not for us to decide, Tom," he concluded. "There's a reason for the chain of command." Randall repeated his father's remarks about World War I and replied, "Because officers sitting 5 miles behind the front lines know better than the men who can actually see what's going on." The patrol leader, a tall officer in the distinctive Waffen-SS uniform, was now easily visible through Randall's scope. The man walked confidently ahead, giving hand signals to his patrol and occasionally glancing at a map. This was a well-planned operation with a clear objective, not a random reconnaissance. Winters tried again on the radio. "Urgent message, Baker Riel. The enemy patrol is currently 250 meters from your northeast perimeter and is armed with flamethrowers. Please confirm. Over." After 30 seconds of silence, the radio crackled and gave the same answer. "Lightning 6, hold your position. Visibility is poor everywhere. There is no evidence of enemy movement. Out." Randall made a decision. "I'm going to shoot." "Don't do that, Randall. If I'm wrong, I'll be court-martialed. Baker Company is alive if I'm not mistaken." He made small adjustments to his scope to account for wind, distance, and the effect of the cold temperature on ballistics. 300 meters in sight, wind from the west at 3 knots, temperature 7 degrees below zero. Winters paused, then raised his binoculars with a sigh. "I trust your judgment, but I can't see a damn thing. Aim for 300 meters, officer." The wind confirmed 3 knots from the west. At this distance, the temperature affects the drop by 2 inches. Randall regulated his breathing by breathing slowly. He was the ideal target, as the German officer had paused to look at his map again. The heat signature, a human glow against the cold background, was visible through his enhanced vision. Halfway through, he exhaled and pulled the trigger. The silence of the night was broken by the crack of his rifle. Randall saw through his scope as the officer immediately collapsed. He quickly cocked the hammer and fired again, taking out the radio operator before the Germans could react. Confused, the German patrol sprang into action. While some men ran back into the ravine, others fired wildly into the darkness, and still others threw themselves to the ground for cover. Their well-planned infiltration descended into chaos as communication and leadership broke down. Randall continued to fire without interruption. Even in the dark, every shot hit its target. 8 dead, 8 shots. The Germans began to flee in confusion, not knowing how they had been spotted in the darkness or where the shots had come from. The Baker Company was on high alert throughout the valley. The fleeing Germans were now in open terrain and were illuminated by flares shot into the sky. The remaining patrol members were killed when American machine guns opened fire. A scattered group of survivors running for their lives had replaced the elite infiltration force. Their position had already been undermined by Winters. "We have to act immediately. All German artillery units in the area will concentrate here." Randall hastily dismantled his rifle, taking care to leave the modified sight intact. "We broke the rules, which is why Baker Company is still in business." Winters replied, "Baker Company is still alive because you're the luckiest shooter in the European theater, or the craziest. Before we find out which is true, let's get going." German artillery began shelling their old position shortly after they crossed the ridge. Randall knew he would have to defend his actions and his unauthorized equipment modifications to the commanding officers, who valued tradition over initiative as they retreated through American lines. He didn't know that the German patrol he had stopped was the vanguard of a much larger infiltration group waiting to seize any opportunity, and that his act of insubordination would ultimately save not only Baker Company, but perhaps the entire perimeter of Bastogne. Randall's unauthorized involvement had immediate and complex consequences. The night sky behind him and Winters was lit up with flares and artillery fire as they returned to the battalion command post. With their infiltration group and element of surprise now gone, the German soldiers launched a haphazard attack that the now alert American defenders easily repelled. When they arrived, the commander of Baker Company, Captain Harold Morrison, was already there. When Randall and Winters reported, he was unreadable. Morrison said without further explanation, "You disobeyed direct orders. You initiated combat without authorization, compromised your position, and potentially jeopardized our entire defensive strategy." With a neutral expression, Randall stood at attention. "Yes, sir," Morrison added in a slightly softer voice. "You also saved my entire company." "The patrol you encountered was led by a battalion-strength offensive force. If they had managed to pass our defensive line unnoticed, we would have been overrun within minutes." Winters raised his voice. "Private Randall was able to visually confirm the enemy through his telescopic sight, sir. Given the current threat, he made a tactical decision." Morrison's gaze became tense. "Its extent?" Corporal, standard M1903A4 telescopic sights don't work in complete darkness. What exactly are you saying? For a moment, there was tense silence. Unauthorized modification of government equipment during a conflict could be construed as sabotage, and Randall was aware that disclosure of his modifications could result in more serious penalties than mere disregard of orders. Major Davis, the battalion commander, entered the bunker before he could respond. "I want to see who shot at a German patrol in the dark and how the hell he did it," he declared. Randall was at a loss. He took his modified scope out of his backpack and showed it to the officers. "A night vision enhancement I developed myself, sir. It detects heat signatures against cooler backgrounds using phosphorescent material. A tiny UV light source enhances the effect." Major Davis looked at the device with undisguised interest. "Did you build this yourself? What materials did you use?" "Recovered materials, sir." The phosphorescent paint came from instruments in captured German aircraft. A signal lamp was used to adjust the UV light. Medical X-ray film was used for the filters. "Where did you get the knowledge to make such modifications?" "From hunting in Minnesota. My father and I, sir, developed identical methods for nighttime deer hunting. The materials used here are more sophisticated, but the concepts are the same." Morrison and Davis looked at each other. Finally, Davis said something. He handed the scope back to Randall and said, "Normally, such unauthorized modification would get you into serious trouble, soldier, but these are not normal circumstances. Captain Morrison will be preparing a detailed report on the events of tonight. In the meantime, please prepare a detailed explanation of how this device works. Our technical team will be happy to look into it." "Sir, am I going to be charged?" Randall asked bluntly. Davis thought for a moment. "Not at the moment. The results speak for themselves. However, you were lucky tonight. Be aware of that. Regardless of the outcome, disobeying orders in combat is still a serious offense." "That went better than expected," Winters remarked as they left the command post. Randall nodded. "They want to know how far it goes. That gives us some favor." "Avoid getting too comfortable," Winters said. "Once the current crisis is over, the Army has a long history of breaking the rules. The usefulness of the scope would be repeatedly and impressively proven over the next 72 hours. Randall's ability to identify and engage targets in near total darkness repeatedly thwarted German attempts to penetrate American defenses at night. Word quickly spread among the soldiers that a sniper with night vision was decimating German night patrols. During this time, Randall worked with 4 different spotters, each of whom helped him improve his methods and the efficiency of his modified scope. His remarkable record of 27 confirmed night kills by December 23rd caught the attention of the regimental command. On Christmas Eve, Colonel Sink summoned Randall to his headquarters. Unlike the last meeting with the battalion officers, this officially scheduled meeting was also attended by technical officers and intelligence specialists. Randall brought his rifle, his modified scope, and detailed notes on how it was made and how it worked. "Private Randall," Colonel Sink said, "I have read the reports of your actions over the last few days. Your unauthorized intervention on the evening of December 20th may have prevented hundreds of American casualties. It is amazing how consistently you have been able to thwart the enemy's night operations." Randall remained alert, not knowing where this was going, but Sink continued, "Your modifications to standard equipment constitute a serious breach of protocol. Under normal circumstances, such behavior would result in disciplinary action." Major Williamson of Army Ordnance, one of the technical officers, interrupted him. "If I may, Colonel, I have examined Private Randall's device, and despite its rudimentary nature, it offers a novel solution to a critical combat problem. The ideas he has employed could ultimately lead to the development of more advanced machines." Sink nodded. "That is precisely why I called this meeting. I am temporarily transferring you to a special technology unit, Private Randall. Together with Major Williamson, you will document your modifications and help develop better versions for field testing." Randall was surprised. "I'm not a technician, sir. I'm a sniper," Sink said with a slight smile. "You are apparently both. Even though your marksmanship is excellent, your technical understanding is currently more valuable. Although the Germans are superior in many ways, the dynamics of the campaign could change completely if we can eliminate their ability to operate in the dark." Randall worked directly with the Army's technical staff for the next 2 weeks to improve his night vision enhancement, while the Battle of the Bulge reached its peak and then slowly subsided. Thanks to superior materials, more precise tools, and scientific knowledge, his makeshift modification became a more reliable and efficient system. A prototype based on Randall's concept was completed in January 1945 and tested in the field by several sniper teams. With only minimal additional training, nighttime interaction efficiency increased by 57%, which was an impressive result. Randall's mission on December 20th earned him the Silver Star and a promotion to corporal. The citation emphasized his exceptional bravery and combat readiness when confronting superior enemy forces under difficult circumstances, while his unauthorized equipment modifications went unmentioned. More importantly, the Army began to rethink its procedures for modifying field equipment. To accommodate special situations on the battlefield, a new policy was issued allowing unit commanders to approve tactical modifications as long as they were properly documented and reported. For Randall, this was a life-changing experience. The officers who had previously dismissed the dubious professor as a troublemaker began to admire his views, and he eventually rose to become a recognized technical advisor. He realized that his true ability lay not only in shooting, but also in practical ingenuity, which allowed him to view problems from angles often ignored by conventional military thinking. However, the Germans were confused by their apparent vulnerability to night operations. The German command had concluded that the Americans must have been using a new infrared detection system, which, according to intelligence information obtained after the war, was still in the experimental phase for both sides. The reality that a hunter in Minnesota had made do with discarded materials was too improbable to be considered. Randall continued to divide his time between technological research and military operations as the Allies advanced into Germany in the spring of 1945. Sniper teams throughout the European theater received his modified telescopic sights, which are currently being produced in small quantities by Army ordnance. By the end of the war, snipers using the so-called Randall technique were responsible for more than 300 German nighttime casualties. Randall was sent to a technologically advanced unit near Munich on May 8, 1945, when victory in Europe was announced. He had been ordered to prepare for deployment in the Pacific, where his improvements to night vision equipment would be particularly useful in jungle warfare. After 2 years and 7 months of service, Randall was honorably discharged in October 1945, following Japan's surrender in August and the end of the need for this particular mission. When Randall returned to Clearwater, he spoke unusually openly about his service. Unlike many other veterans who rarely talked about their war experiences, instead of dwelling on the fact that he had killed 73 enemy soldiers during his tour of duty, he focused on the technical difficulties he had overcome and the insights he had gained regarding institutional resistance to innovation. In November 1945, he married Ellen Mitchell, his childhood sweetheart from his hometown. With the help of his technical expertise and veteran benefits, he enrolled in engineering courses at the University of Minnesota. By 1950, he had earned a degree in optical engineering and was working for a company that manufactured hunting and sporting goods. Randall's continuous innovations in the field of optical systems were the most important part of his post-war life. Although he used more advanced materials, in 1952, he patented a civilian rifle scope that used similar concepts to his wartime version. This served as the basis for Randall Optics, a company he founded in 1995 that focused on low-light equipment for military and civilian use. The company remained modest, but was well known in its field. Randall deliberately avoided major military contracts to focus on useful applications for search and rescue teams, sportsmen, and wildlife researchers. In an interview with 1968, he remarked, "I've seen what happens when innovation gets swallowed up by bureaucracy. Sometimes you find the best solutions outside the system." Randall stayed in touch with a number of his former comrades throughout the 1950s and 1960s, including James Winters, who had joined the Chicago Police Department. In their letters, they often discussed how their experiences during the war had influenced their approach to problems and authority. In 1963, Winters wrote, "What I remember most is how sure everyone was that you were wrong, until the moment you proved you were right. I learned to question preconceptions, even when they come from experts." In 1991, 27 years after the Battle of the Bulge, Randall received a surprise letter from the U.S. Army Infantry School at Fort Benning. His case study, which has since been declassified, was used as an example of how initiative and technical improvisation can solve seemingly insurmountable tactical problems as part of a new curriculum they developed on creativity and adaptability on the battlefield. The letter contained statements from survivors of Baker Company. Many of them had never heard the whole story of how they had been saved that night in December. One particularly poignant letter came from former Private First Class Edward Collins. "After the war, I had 3 children and 7 grandchildren. If you hadn't done what no one else would do and seen what no one else could see, none of them would be here. I told them about the night an angel protected us with a gun. In 1972, Randall was asked to speak to a class of officer candidates at the infantry school about the balance between initiative and discipline in war. He explained to them that rules exist for good reason. But sometimes situations arise where following the rules leads to disaster. In the 1970s and 1980s, this idea was gradually integrated into military training. The challenge is to recognize the difference and have the courage to act when lives are at stake. According to a Rand Corporation study on innovation on the battlefield, the Randall incident was a prime example of how flexibility on the front lines can overcome dogmatic inflexibility and technological limitations. In a broader sense, Randall's story became part of military folklore, one of those semi-legendary tales that instructors tell new recruits to show them that doing the right thing and following the rules are sometimes not the same thing. Although later electronic night vision devices surpassed the technical aspects of his invention, the idea that the best solution is sometimes not found in the manual remained valid. Randall died peacefully in 1993 at the age of 70, surrounded by his family. His obituary in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune acknowledged his Silver Star and his successful business, but omitted the full story of his wartime innovation. Although this story hardly ever reached the general public, it continued to circulate in military circles and occasionally appeared in specialist media. It was not until 2018, 74 years after the Battle of the Bulge, that a detailed account was published. Randall's improvement of night vision devices and their influence on tactical doctrine were the subject of an entire chapter in the book, Invisible Victories: Unauthorized Innovation in World War II, by military historian Robert Carlson. Using declassified documents and interviews with surviving veterans, Carlson provided the most comprehensive account to date of how a soldier's willingness to disobey orders may have changed the outcome of a decisive battle. According to the book, Randall's changes had a direct influence on post-war studies of night vision technology. Many of the scientists who worked on the first generation of electric night vision devices in the 1950s had read Randall's work and adopted some of his ideas, particularly with regard to the detection of temperature changes. Due to the sensitivity of this technology, this connection was kept secret for decades. Carlson discovered that a special order issued on December 28, 1944, suspending all night operations in the Bastogne zone indefinitely, was part of the German archives seized after the war. The order effectively eliminated one of the Germans' most important tactical advantages in the decisive phase of the battle, when weather conditions prevented Allied air support, and referred to the inexplicable ability of the Americans to attack targets in complete darkness with unprecedented accuracy. Interest in Randall's story grew in the years following the publication of Carlson's book. The story of a young soldier who followed his instincts rather than the rules and saved numerous lives served as an important lesson for leadership programs in business, the military, and documentary filmmakers. When the U.S. Army's Night Vision and Electronic Sensors Directorate in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, named its innovation lab after Thomas Randall in 2021, it was arguably the most fitting tribute. The greatest threat in combat is not the strength of the enemy, but our inability to see beyond our own limitations, he said in his 1972 speech at Fort Benning, which is immortalized on the entrance monument. The story of Thomas Randall contains an important lesson that extends far beyond military history. In times of crisis, having the courage to question conventional wisdom and see what others cannot or will not see can literally be a matter of life and death. His story reminds us that even with the best of intentions, regulations and procedures are developed using the technologies and conditions currently available. Sometimes the only people who recognize the need for adaptability when conditions change are those on the front lines. Randall's invention was remarkable not only for its technological ingenuity, but also for the moral courage it required. Despite the risk of falling out of favor and facing a court-martial, he chose to follow his own instincts rather than the advice of his superiors. To save lives that would have been lost under the existing regulations, he put his career on the line. This conflict between institutional control and individual initiative still exists today, not only in the military environment, but in any hierarchical organization dealing with difficult, rapidly evolving problems. When should we adhere to established protocols, and when should we deviate from them? How do we strike a balance between the importance of innovation on the front lines and the need for coordination and standardization? While there are no easy solutions to these problems, Randall's story shows that sometimes the person who is willing to look beyond conventional boundaries is the one who best understands reality. What surprised you most about this story? Was it the fact that hundreds of lives were saved by a simple hunting technique that was modified for combat? Or the discovery that an invention that eventually became commonplace was initially rejected by the military bureaucracy. Or perhaps the realization that one person's willingness to risk everything, freedom, reputation, and career, could change the outcome of a decisive battle in World War II. The qualities that turn ordinary people into heroes whose influence lasts for decades are the courage to see things differently, to act when others hesitate, and to risk everything for what you believe is right. Thomas Randall not only saved lives on that freezing December night, but his legacy lives on in every instance where someone finds the will to believe in their own vision, even though the world insists they cannot see what they claim to see. If this story has moved you, share it with someone who believes that individual courage and ingenuity can overcome insurmountable obstacles.